Welcome to Musitations, sound healing and sound wisdom for a world in need. On Musitations, we explore all things musical, meditative, and creative for healing, transformation, and awakening the relationship between nature, culture, and the soul. I'm Michael Branty Maria, and I'm your host and guide on this journey on the edge of a new millennium. I bring my 30-plus years of experience as an integrative wellness guide, best-selling author, meditation, yoga, mindfulness teacher, and a 4-time Grammy-nominated musician. Join me now on this adventure of awakening the soul. Welcome back to Musitations. I am so thrilled today to have McCall Erickson back. We had her back on episode 6, in Alchemy and the Awakening of the Soul. And McCall, I shared in the last podcast that her work, her poems, her writing, her podcast, Fall into Soul, yes? Falling into Soul, just touched my heart. It really resonated with my own experience of doing soul work. And this idea that we need to drop in and not avoid the mess, not avoid the dark, not avoid that fertile soil that is the richness that everything else grows from. We also come from some similar struggles with more traditional spirituality, more traditional music, more traditional healing methods versus having to take our own journey and finding that inner healer, that inner alchemist, that inner shaman, inner guru inside. And so we're really both passionate about helping empower people to become their own best guide, to really listen to their own experience, their own heart, their own emotion. And so the reason I asked McCall back on, and the reason I ask you back on, McCall, I saw you post the drama triangle on one of your posts. And for those who don't know, the drama triangle, and I'll let you say more about it, but it's something that I had forgotten about. I had learned about years and years ago, and part of my codependency recovery, really big part of my codependency recovery. Many people may have heard about the rescuer, perpetrator, victim triangle is often the way it's also referred to. And because we have both been on a recovery of codependency, I really said, gee, I just, spontaneously said, we should do a podcast on this. And you were just as excited about it. And we talked about the importance of emotional sobriety. And some of you might be wondering, why on Musitations would I want to talk about emotional sobriety? Because so many people think of the arts as, diving into our passion and feeling everything we feel. And that's true, where oftentimes people feel meditation is about either not thinking, not feeling, or at least at the very most stepping back from our feelings, which is what it is at one level. But for me, particularly as a creative, as an artist, musician, poet, it's critical to be in touch with what's going on in this moment in my heart, my body, my soul, my fingertips, my feet, my everything. And it took me a long time. I wasn't prone to alcoholic drugs or other kinds of substances, but when it came to rescuing others and getting in their drama and feeling that that I somehow I would over empathize, that their feelings became my feelings, or I would know what they were feeling before I knew what I was feeling. And when I first heard that word emotional sobriety, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, oh my Lord, that's my drug. That's my drug, which is a little bit hard to say, but I also think that a lot of people think emotions and feelings are the same. And that's one thing I would love to share. And I just always find you to be particularly articulate about this, and you're so passionate in your work about it. And you really are willing to wade into those difficult conversations So without further ado, because I feel like anybody out there either trying to meditate or be creative or follow your muse, understanding these dynamics will serve you tremendously and bring some more sanity. Because I also find, I don't know if you find this too, McCall, I actually will lose my creative focus often. So one thing pouring my heart into creativity, it's another thing when I get lost and lose my focus because of the emotionality, as you've said and talked about when we've had these conversations. So without further ado, I want to welcome my alchemical uh, soul sister, McCall Erickson, singer, songwriter, and artist healer to Musitations. Once again, thanks for being here, McCall.
Thanks for having me. You honor me so well. It just fills me with amazing light. Thank you so much. I love your question. What does emotional sobriety have to do with musitations and creativity? And my mind immediately says everything. Because for me, if I don't have that emotional sobriety, and I know we can expand on what that even is, I'm disconnected from my true creative flow. Like there's a difference between getting caught up in all of the stories of the ego or hijacked by our drug of choice, helping others, like feeling everything, feeling other people, being hijacked by that and being involved in that. But there's a difference between that and sinking down into that true flow of our soul.
Mm.
So I really love that you called it your drug of choice, because in my early years, like I've been working on this for 25 plus years now, 25, I shouldn't exaggerate, 25. And I remember feeling like something was wrong, like I was out of control. And I had some really close people in my life who were in recovery for alcoholism and drug abuse. And I started going to 12-step groups with them because I'm like, this is amazing. And I felt like an imposter because I really didn't have a problem with drugs or alcohol, but I loved the 12 steps. And then it took me a while to realize, oh my God, I'm actually a codependent. I'm an enabler. That's why I'm always in relationships with addicts and alcoholics. Like, so it's really takes a while to understand the drug because it's subtle and it masquerades as doing good and helping others, and love, it masquerades as love, and it is love on one level. It's an intense feeling of love that we're helping others and getting, getting into their emotions and their stories and their narratives. But the underlying point, I think, for to realize is, the question for me is, am I being hijacked? Am
Mm.
I being hijacked
Mm.
by my emotions, hijacked by the narrative of my ego, hijacked by the narrative of somebody else's ego and story? Or am I living that deeper pole that, as Rumi says, unfold your own story, unfold your own myth? Am I living that? Or am I just being hijacked by my love for people and the emotional storms? So that's a question that I'm always working with, always moving with. It's an ongoing thing.
That's beautiful, McCall. I really like that word hijacked, and it's really helped me as well. Actually, I just got finished with this great book. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but The White Knight Syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
I have to send you the link to it. It's really really good, and it's so ties into this. And by the way, I was the same way. I loved going to 12-step meetings, even though I didn't actually, after my vision quest 28 years ago, I didn't drink at all for 10 years, and then I drink very very, have a sip of wine a couple times a year. That would be a big deal. And I felt there was something about the 12 steps was so critical for me. And of course, I also found my way to Al Anon and, Coda, and have my little Coda chips, that I still use and that I give out. And I think that that's where some of us, particularly because right now, and why I felt it was so refreshing seeing it from you, was we are in such a fix it culture. and everyone's trying to tell us they have the answer for us. And I think it's a real danger, actually, because, there's wonderful stuff. And I think also you can tell when a culture is in decline, when every other person is becoming a healer, therapist, or coach, it's but that's true. I mean, that's part of what's happening, is that we're going through, I can't remember if I mentioned before but I see us on this global soul initiation. And so we do need each other to do the work that only we can do. Right. And I think that kind of understanding, that what I often will tell people, I don't have any answers for you, but I can share with you what I found to be true for me. And I can hold space as I help you find what's true for you. And that, took me years. I mean, part of we were talking at the beginning before we got on the air about, you having to kind of unlearn what you were taught in music school. And I had to unlearn. I sometimes think of myself as a recovering psychologist, after retiring last year from 30 plus years. And you're taught to have the answers. You're taught, you're even taught the answers, which are not the answers, actually. And I think that, and this idea of emotional sobriety, and I'd love maybe both of us to say how we're currently understanding and learning about it. And it's always, I think it's a never-ending unfolding. But one thing I found, and I know this was part of the notes we talked about the difference between emotionality and feeling. Let me tell you what my first thought about it, and I want to hear what you think too. One way of understanding for me that's been helpful is feeling is always here and now. Feeling is feeling into what is here and now. That emotions for me have a lot more to do with unresolved experiences or past experiences where it wasn't safe to feel in the here and now. So that's one way I tend to think about it. But share with the listeners and with me your understanding of that difference, and how you kind of notice the difference and how you practice the difference.
Oh, that's so good. Because I think the emotionality and the emotions, and I'm not a psychologist at all, so I don't have the training you do, but the emotions seem to build up around trauma, around unresolved trauma. And it's habitual, it's habits that we build up around that. So we can't get to the feeling that we really need to be digesting and processing here and now. It's like something happens and we're on automatic, habitual, well, these are my emotions around that, right? And one thing that helped me tremendously when I started learning about feeling and dropping down into the feeling that's here and now is that those feelings almost always have no story attached to them. They're just sensations.
Yes.
They're just energy. And so I started this thing that I call feeling without words. And it helped me separate the story about the feeling or the emotions from the feeling and feel without words, which I think is maybe what a lot of people do when they begin meditating, right? Detaching the mind stories from being in the body and all that. So feeling without words to me means separating the ego story, because the ego is going to create a narrative around what's happening and around what I'm actually feeling. Learning to separate those two was the hugest thing for me, because the ego narrative wants to take you on a ride. It's a roller coaster ride, and it doesn't solve anything, and it doesn't transmute anything. It doesn't move anything. It doesn't transform anything. You're in the same place you were after you took the roller coaster ride of the ego, or after you get hijacked by someone else's narrative. That's the thing. It can be our ego narrative or someone else's. We take the ride, we come back, and we're the ones who are left with the mess. So to me, it's like learning the feelings that are here and now, that don't have a story attached to them, that need to be digested like food, right? Like a meal, you digest those feelings, you process them, and they move through. That's another reason you can know you're actually feeling instead of being caught in the ego loop of emotionality, is the feelings actually move. They're fluid like water.
Yes. Beautiful. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's so true. I find in any listeners out there, one thing that you can practice, I find the same thing to be true, that especially dropping into the belly, the pelvic floor, breathing into the soles of the feet, really, really getting to that visceral parts of the body, and the parts of the body we ignore so much. When I'm in story, out my breath will slow, or I'll stop breathing and I'll get into
Mm,
drama. I'll feel the drama take me over. And it's literally like breaking a trance, right? Isn't it like
mm,
breaking a trance? It's like, okay, I'll do this really deep belly breath, and I've been more and more into this, the third diaphragm, which is the pelvic bowl. There's actually three diaphragms, the throat and chest, and then the belly, and then the pelvic bowl. And dropping down, and if I can breathe into that space, you're absolutely right. The story drops, the story dissolves, because the story's happening up here, so I really love that. And yes, I agree 100% that it's unresolved trauma. And so the ego keeps trying to find a way. In psychology, we call the repetition compulsion, where the mind keeps trying to get mastery over something where it
mm,
felt wounded, it lost status, it whatever it might be. And so I do think that's so beautiful that when we come into the present moment, because yeah, the ego's about trying to power up, or the other little mantra I use is, was I'm breathing deeply, is no shame, no blame, because the ego
mm,
wants to either blame or go into shame, right? Either it's their fault or my fault, when it's
mm,
nobody's fault. It's just situations. It's just, like you were saying, fluid flowing unfoldings. And that's why I like the word souling, that the soul is, if the soul is a river, the soul is a fluid unfolding, is a verb, not a noun, that we are, you're McCalling along,
I
I'm
love that.
Michaeling along, that those dramas, those narratives always have to do with nouns.
Mm,
You did this to me, I did that to you, which really is a illusion, in the sense that, we're no longer in a Newtonian view of objects in space, and this is this idea of, we are music, that we are
mhm,
vibration. And you just have, I always love in your writing, you just have such an intuitive sense of all of this stuff, and you've done your work. And believe me, doing personal work to me is much more important than reading textbooks and, getting degrees. I mean, because there's plenty of, quote, psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals who haven't done any of their own work out there,
mm,
and can do more harm than good, because if you haven't done your work and you pose as if you have some answer for the other person, you can actually do harm, because you're going to actually alienate them even more from their innate wisdom.
mm,
So I really love that. And I love the idea of the digesting, feeling, processing. It's coming back to what you so beautifully talk about, is it's alchemical, it's transmutation, turning the lead into gold, right? And turning, I think of often depression as a pressed down emotion, right? You're depressing, you're pushing down, or even the feeling, as opposed to, kind of a mutiny of the soul. It's like, feel what you feel and find some way to express it and be with it, and preferably without story.
mm. So that actually segues into something that I think is a really important point that Pete Walker talks about in his book, The Tao of Fully Feeling. Can't recommend it enough for people who are feeling this. And he talks about the difference between feeling and emoting, and how both of them are necessary to healing. And so feeling would be the more feminine, passive part, what we've been talking about, feeling without words, feeling without story, where you go inward and you have to digest it inward. And you take the blame away, you take the shame away, and you feel, you go in, feel, digest. It's not an active process. It's passive. It's very passive. But then the active, more masculine part of the healing is what you just said, finding a way to express the feeling, which we need to do. And you talk about so beautifully, it gives me chills just thinking about it, when you went on your vision quest and realized that you had so much unprocessed grief.
Mm.
And that one way you found to process the grief was through, it makes me cry, through the flutes and through the music. And to me, that would be the emoting or releasing. So we process, but sometimes we need to release it. But you're releasing it in a non emotionality way, in a aligned way. And another important thing about how we release our emotion when it needs to be released is not taking it out on other people, doing the least amount of damage we can. um, I had a lot of unprocessed anger when in college, when I started really digging into all of this stuff, and I bought myself a plastic bat, and I would beat my bed in my dorm room and in everywhere I lived with my plastic bat. And I remember carrying that from place to place for like 10 years until I finally realized I didn't need it anymore. But that was a really safe way to release the anger. Not everything can be internally digested. We also need the release. And of course, music is that for me too, because music is, and songwriting is the one place where I can tell the truth. Like
Mm.
it's the one place
Mm.
where I can, it doesn't have to have, it doesn't have to have a story or any attached. It is, this is what I love about songwriters. All you need is three chords and the truth. I latched onto that so much. That's all I had.
Mm.
So finding a way without lashing out, and like you said, blaming, shaming, without perpetuating the trauma, without perpetuating it, without passing it on to someone else, finding a way to healthily emote and release it, express it, is as important as that internal feeling. Both are hugely necessary.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. And thank you. It's so important, this step towards expression, and in fact, I don't know if I've mentioned, I've, this came to me in a vision at 18, but I haven't had a chance to really write about it. And it's something I hope to put in this next book, Souling. But I call it ontosynthesis. In fact, my company Ontos and Ontos Music, Ontos World Press, all come from Ontos, meaning being, which also, though, originally came to me through ontosynthesis. Ontos also means the ongoing numinous tracking of soul. But for me, ontosynthesis is not a theory. It's trying to just simply describe like photosynthesis. So photosynthesis turns light into life.
Mm,
And ontosynthesis happens in the human heart, and it turns life, particularly suffering, into love.
mm,
And it happens when we fully feel like we let our experience fully into our heart. And I think it's so cool that the heart chakra is considered green, like chlorophyll.
mm,
And that if we really, we take it in, we feel fully what it is we feel, and then give it expression, it turns into love and wisdom.
mm.
Love, compassion, wisdom. So that's actually, I don't talk about that much, but you just inspired that because you said it so beautifully. It was like, that's ontosynthesis. And I really feel that we are creating, well, Teilhard de Chardin said this. He said, we're creating a newest sphere, like the atmosphere that just like, and this gets me emotional, the plants for, millions of years created the oxygen. So paving the way for us, and that here we're literally creating an atmosphere of conscious love for whatever's to come. If we do this work, that when each of us do our work, when we feel our suffering all the way through and give it expression and actually turn it into beauty, deep beauty, like Native people talk about, we're literally creating a new kind of atmosphere on the planet,
Mm,
that we will one day, that literally we're creating a sphere of consciousness. It's not embodied, it's not in our skull, it's a field that we have the option to either contribute to or not. So hoping that, I don't care anymore if it sounds too woo to anyone out there, but I know I can share that with you. So thank you for giving such a beautiful expression of what I consider ontosynthesis.
that's really beautiful. And I love it. Like, that's to me alchemy. Like,
Yeah.
that's what personal alchemy is. Like, we're the alchemy lab. And we have this opportunity to turn our personal suffering into something beautiful that goes into the collective and changes the energy of the collective. And you said this in your book, the trick, your book, Ever Flowing On, the trick is to realize that when you're working on yourself, you're working on the good for the good of all. And it's hardly ever personal. It's always the personal as it relates to the collective. It affects everyone. And I think this point of understanding and realization for people who are moving from the codependent way of relating in the drama triangle, realizing that if you let go of trying to fix things for everyone else and you realize what your own personal work is and you do it, you're contributing more than you would if you were being hijacked and in that codependent codependent frenzy of
Mm,
trying to control everything and change everything.
yeah.
If you step back for a moment and focus on your personal part, which is hard to do when you're not used to doing it,
Yes.
then you are contributing more to the global field of energy that increases with all this love and beauty that can come out. Otherwise, you're stuck. That's why it's called a triangle. You're just stuck in the same way. You go back and forth between those roles, thinking you're doing something, but it's the same stories on repeat over and over and over.
Oh, this is so well said. And that, good segue to talk a little more about the drama triangle, that I think it's harder for us to see as helpers, and the difference between a caretaker and a caregiver that I was taught was a caregiver gives without any expectation of return. But a caretaker, there is a subtle subconscious need and desire to be appreciated, to hear a thank you, for the person to actually follow through and do it. And if you find yourself having emotions around what they do or don't, outcome, because again, the caregiving in a non-codependent way, you're not attached to outcome, where caretaking you can be. And also if you're in that place of enabling where we are, and one way I think of enabling is if you're giving to your detriment, you're right.
That's so good.
Detriment, that if you're giving also and the person is either staying the same or getting worse and you're getting worse, then it's like I say, you meet somebody in quicksand, or if you're with a loved one and you're walking through the woods and they fall in quicksand, our intention, or I should say our default, at least my default, was often to jump in this quicksand with them, like, let me help you out, right? And then you're in the quicksand. But even standing and trying to pull them out is dangerous. Even giving them a rope is dangerous because you're not sure if they really want to get out. So I always say, get a long rope, tie one side of the rope to a tree, throw them the other side of the rope, and be a coach, and then you can see, because a lot of people will drop the rope because they're not actually interested in getting out. And again, if you've been enabling and being that rescuer, the way the drama triangle works, just for people that haven't heard of this before, and I'm going to put a link to it in the comment section, that as soon as you stop enabling, you will be considered the perpetrator.
Yep. Yep.
It's like, well, I can't believe you used to be such a nice person. It's like, no, I'm not being a doormat anymore, and also realizing that one of the most beautiful things we can do for people is let them feel the full weight of their existence on their shoulders. Just like I always like to say, everybody needs to feel 100% responsibility for their health and happiness. And one of the things, or the two things I see torpedo relationships the most, and I've learned this the hard way through my own experience, is feeling the other person is responsible for your happiness or feelings, and having unrealistic expectations of the other person and yourself, actually. So, this sense of what I call a heart warrior: expect nothing, be ready for anything, be grateful for everything, and take 100% responsibility. In recovery work, as we always, with the fourth step, is we're going to look at our part in whatever happened. And that was also so freeing, because even when I'm feeling hurt, when I'm feeling rejected, when I'm feeling, wow, look at what everything I did for you, and you just drop me like that as a friend or whatever. And being able to know, what, maybe I was contributing to the hurt. Maybe I was hurting you by helping in the way I was, or maybe, and that was a really hard thing. I don't know for you, but for me, it was very humbling, painful. Trying to tune into that without self-hate or self-contempt, but it's much more hard to see how we hurt people as codependents because we're so rewarded for it in our culture. We live in the most codependent culture that's ever existed,
Oh my
and we are so rewarded for being the white knight. And when that's not often, in fact, I'm not sure it's ever what people really need, and the whole old saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man a fish, feed him for a lifetime. So I can't remember all of the updated, I think you called it the compassion triangle, where you're being a coach instead of a rescuer. You're being, instead of a victim, you're being, do you remember them? Do you remember the
Yeah,
part?
so yeah, so the the rescuer transmutes to the supporter and
Yes.
the coach. The victims transmutes to the survivor thriver,
Yes.
and the perpetrator transmutes to the challenger.
Nice. Yeah.
Which is, yeah, I mean, subtle differences, and you can feel them in yourself
Yes.
when you're doing the difference. But yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. And I will put those connections down there. I was looking at some of our other notes, and I noticed a couple things, you had noted down. We were talking about resentment and feeling self-righteous.
Mm.
Resentment's such a tough one, and again, in recovery, fourth step is all about our resentments, looking at, and the way I like to think of it, and I really want to hear your thoughts about it and what's supported you, and maybe tips for the listeners, that it comes back over and over again to expectation.
Mm.
Thinking that the world somehow um, is going to go along with my script. It's like, oh, you're not playing your role in this script. And it's like, yep. And I often challenge myself and others, like, can you taste for a moment what would it feel like to let go of all of your beliefs and expectations about yourself, others, and reality? Just, can you
Mm.
give me a little taste of that? Because people will argue to me up and down, like, well, are you telling me this was not reasonable? This is not a reasonable request, that, and of course the bottom line is, nothing is fair, nothing is reasonable. And there's no stone tablet in the sky saying people are going to abide by the 10 commandments, much less my script for what
Mhm.
ethical living is. So anyway, those are just some thoughts, but whatever hits you or whatever you'd like to respond to from there,
Yeah, so there's one thing that's burning in me that I feel like would
please.
be really good to bring to this conversation. You said we live in the most codependent culture ever. I mean, it permeates everything, every narrative that we're a part of when we leave our front doors, and hopefully not in our front doors as much after we do the work. But so to me, the root of what keeps us in the triangle and in that narrative of victim, rescuer, and perpetrator is a fundamental disconnect with our core worth.
Mm,
Which, so when we're disconnected from our core worth, we get our worth based on what we can do for other people or how we can control things, right? Once you're reconnected with your sense of worth, and you talk about this a lot, like finding that connection to soul and nature through the breath and through music or whatever it is, we are nature, and finding that our worth is inherent in our existence. It's not based on anything else. Nothing. That's it. Like, there are no more qualifiers. Every person who is alive and has breath has worth. That's it. But we're disconnected from our worth because of trauma, right? Trauma disconnects us from that core worth that we are nature, we are God, we are love, all that. So we disconnect. And so our worth is based on how we can make other people feel, how we can control the narrative.
Yeah.
So anytime I'm feeling that control, that need to control the story, make people do a certain thing, it's because I'm uncomfortable. Why am I uncomfortable? Drop down even farther. Where have I been hurt and wounded before? Drop down even below that. Where's my core worth beneath the wound? So it's layers deep to get to that and operate from a place of core worth where we're connected to that in ourselves and we see it in everyone else. Like you're saying, everyone needs to feel the weight of existence on their shoulder. Conversely, they need to feel the connection of their worth based on their existence and nothing else. And everything is the heart warrior. I think you said the expect nothing, be ready for everything. I'm always saying to people, life owes you nothing. Life owes us nothing.
Oh,
Breath is the gift. Breath is the gift. We are not owed anything. So, a product of being in a codependent society is entitlement. We think we're owed something. The gift is breath. That's it. That's it. I know that's not fun for the ego to hear, or when we have so much trauma and we need to maintain a sense of control somehow, that's not a fun idea to think that life doesn't owe us anything, but it's the reality. And that's where the creativity and flow with nature and the deeper voice that resonates through the earth and everything around us, that's where that connection comes in. And so you're living and breathing in direct connection with that. That's a different story. That's a different unfolding.
beautiful, beautiful. Oh, I just speaking to my heart. And it's the kind of thing, on a vision fast you experience when you thank you for that, McCall. I
Mm.
hope everyone out there letting that just kind of hit a bit. This it is all grace. The gift is the breath. We are not owed anything. I really love that. It's such an important, you know, ground, coming into this. To me that was the real felt experience out there on my first solo fast, and that continued, the lament in the wild. And one of my prayers was, air to breathe and earth to be. I couldn't
Mm.
even say earth to stand on because I was so weak at times without food or water. It was literally
Mm.
that the most precious thing was my breath.
Mm.
And I realized that was everything else. That itself was grace, but everything else was grace, is grace, always grace. And I think it goes very much to our denial of death too in our culture. We deny because that truth reminds us we come here and everything we will learn to love and claim we have to give away. And
Mm.
it's another truth the ego doesn't want to hear. And yet that is the ground of genuine deep compassion, wisdom, and love. And so, and that's why I like to think of every breath as a note in the song of today, coming into existence and dying. Every moment we are being born and dying. Every
Mm.
breath, every breath. And so I love that. And I love, and if I think if we can invite each other to be in that truth, by the grace of God go I, um, we really are doing our soul work. We're inviting people into that essential vulnerability that lets us wake up, and
Mm.
and that is so much what I find in your work and in your words. I love how passionate you get about it too. It just touches my heart. So it's really, you're living and breathing it, and it's so so valuable. And I think that's such a also an existential corrective to a lot of the abundance kind of messages out there. And it doesn't mean, because I think the corollary is that then everything to me the abundance is the air. Look how much air we have to breathe
Mhm.
around. But but translating it into somehow I deserve, this much money or this kind of house or this kind of partner or whatever, we get into, there's a real, the ego co-ops a deep existential truth or ontological truth about the gift of being itself, the gift of breath. So I really love that. You're always so, like even having that, that falling into soul, that you kind of in some ways, have to fall from grace to find your soul.
Mhm.
We have to fall off that pedestal. And I guess that's an interesting circle that I know, and I know you've shared this too. When we remember that our deepest awakening came from our deepest defeat, we
Mhm.
have no business saving other people from their defeat, right?
Yes,
So, yes,
exactly.
yes.
It's disrespectful. In many ways, it's disrespectful to engage or interrupt their process of falling, you
Aho,
know?
aho.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I think I'm loving that we're kind of leaning into that and landing there unintentionally because, we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. Everyone's existence is playing out God coming into being and then having to die, whether you take the
Mhm.
Christian or whatever spiritual tradition you come from, there is the death rebirth understanding that we each have to live that out. And I truly see us each, I think I've mentioned before, as a nerve ending or a node of divine pure consciousness in this field of infinite awareness. And instead another way where each and a nerve ending of the divine, that we're a microcosm of the macrocosm, that and that for the soul to be initiated, we must allow that person to go into their depths, which
Mm.
whether it's unraveling, losing their mind. That doesn't mean not to hold space, but not to interfere. I love that you said their process. You know,
Mhm.
how many people keep the caterpillar from cocooning, you know, and unfortunately our healthcare system is terrible at interrupting soul initiation by
Oh,
medication. uh, Even therapy at times can keep people away. We certainly know how traditional religion has, I don't know if Bill Plotkin, one of my dearest teachers, would always say, um, hell is just a filibuster to keep you away from your soul.
oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
But we have other filibusters, the concept of depression as opposed to seeing it
Mhm.
as a dark night of the soul. So
Yeah.
anyway, I really, the thing I know you do in your work, and I hear most often from people I work with, is they'll literally say, "Thank you for validating my suffering. Thank you for
Mhm.
validating my suffering." And as a recovering codependent, I think also thank you for not interfering with my suffering is what I also
Yeah.
like to hear sometimes, although that doesn't happen as often.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing you did mention recently, how do we form healthy attachments?
Mm,
Because in the codependent triangle, the drama triangle, we obviously have attachments based on our trauma and our unhealed wounds. But then when we work through that and we come out and we're living in a new energy, we're still in this world. We're still dependent on each other for so many things. And how do we form healthy attachments so we're not just bypassed out into some bliss land where nothing hurts us and
yeah.
we're not suffering? And what you touched on to me is the key. Realizing that everything is in a life and death cycle, including ourselves. Everything we love is in the process of disappearing, and learning to process our feelings and emotions properly and grieve properly helps us realize that we can do that again and we will do it again, and we are always in that process at some point. So learning to feel, learning to process feelings, learning to release emotions, to me, and I call that all alchemy, alchemizing and transmuting. To me, it builds a confidence Not that we will never have to suffer or never have to lose what we love again or who we love, but that when we do, when the time comes, the time will come. Every attachment has an expiration. So for me, it's about learning to attach and knowing with confidence that I have the tools necessary to go through the process of grief and let go and process whatever I need to when it's time. Every attachment has an expiration date in this physical world.
Amen. Amen. Aho. That's beautiful. Thank you for that. And in fact, I thank you for bringing up attachment. And for those who may not be as familiar, two things that have been really helpful. And again, my own journey, my recovery journey, is understanding the difference between attachment and connection. And connections are these relationships that don't undermine us when they go awry as much, and we might not see the person for 3 months or 6 months when we reconnect, just like but it's stable, consistent, it's enjoyable. We're kind of connect in that way. Attachment-based relationships, which are mirroring our very early relationships of parent-child in particular, they can. And you're in an attachment relationship when something goes wrong and you fall into what we call primal panic, visceral sense of becoming undone. And of course, this often happens in romantic relationships, but it certainly can happen with friendships, certainly happens with siblings and parents and children, because they are attachment-based by definition. And attachment, although I don't, it's so funny in, Buddhism and meditation and yoga, we talk about non-attachment. But the fact is, I love what you said. It's inevitable that we have attachment relationships. And part of it, I think, is asking yourself, when you're in a relationship, is this attachment-based or a connection? If it is attachment-based, and, and not to get too much into the psychology of secure attachment and, insecure attachment or anxious avoiding, et cetera, that could be another podcast. But the issue for me always is two things. Number one, like you said, because you have to know that being willing and able to be part of the attachment relationship is going to be more investment of time and energy. And also when it is disrupted, which, like you said, which I'm getting to, it's inevitable that it has an expiration date, that just because it does provide a tremendous amount of security and joy and comfort, because we do come into the world so vulnerable as infants that we do attach. We have to attach in that way. But when I tell people, which the ego doesn't like hearing either, all relationships will either end in abandonment, leaving, or betrayal. And people just are horror. No, that can't be. And it's like, even if it's death, even if it's amazing and incredible till death, that's still leaving. That's still, and maybe abandonment. And so this idea of expiration, and this is something you don't find in the psychological literature, of course, is that to me, our first attachment, the attachment-based relationship we should cultivate the most, is to being at large, spirit, the ground, source, God, goddess, whatever you want to call it, the Tao. This is what we have the opportunity as adults, true adults, to do when we didn't have that choice as infants. We carry that imprint of those early attachments or those early attachment wounds, but we have a responsibility. And part of a soul initiation for me is experiencing your felt connection to that larger presence and cultivating it, because it is to me the most important relationship and should be our first priority, not to stay away from it, but actually to enter into relationships from a place where we'll be a bit more resilient. It doesn't mean there won't be tears. It doesn't mean there won't be hurt. It doesn't mean you're not going to have suffering, but it's manageable, So, and the second one is then to our own soul, our attachment to our own soul and our own self-care and our own care of soul. And then to our attachment-based relationships. And I think if those first two are in place, we also are more capable of making healthier decisions when it comes to how we are going to invest in, because it is an investment. All relationships are investment to some degree. And I always like to say, is this relationship, are they making enough deposits to cover the withdrawals they're making? If not, you need to close the account. or at least, decrease their ability to, hey, you got a deficit here. Until that account's filled up, there's nothing here. And that took me a long time to learn, because I would give and give and give to my detriment. And I share this in my books, but I've burned out 3 times in my life, and
Mm.
I just don't want to do that. I probably will do it again. Who knows? But I really feel in a much healthier place than I ever have. But it's still
Mhm.
hard. It's hard to say no. It's hard to the drug of being the white knight, the drug of codependency that, we see it in movies, we hear it on the radio. The message is, well, Jesus, Mother Teresa, you become the martyr.
Mhm.
So anyway, thank you for those thoughts. I have no idea. Always, whenever we're talking, it seems to go so fast. But yeah, we have a little bit of time left. Anything else that you feel? I think we covered most everything outside of the. Well, we touched a little bit on the self-righteousness, which comes into the white knight and all that. But also, if there's anything else that you, well, I'm going to say, I'll add one other thing in case something besides self-righteousness hits. One of the things that I'm also very passionate about is jealousy, possessiveness, like unlearning jealousy and possessiveness, because in our culture we tend to see people as property, very much like our, we think you can own the land. And indigenous people had much more open understandings around sexuality and the amount, many people that you could love or connect to. And we've never talked about things like polyamory or anything. And I'm not that I'm promoting that, but to me, the idea of many loves just being, even if it's non-sexual or whatever, but we have a real issue with jealousy. And I've come to really question whether or not jealousy in and of itself is kind of a creation of Western culture and a fairly devastating, unhealthy emotion that, like anger, that we're so terrified of exposing our loved ones to jealousy, and how powerful it is when you can admit. I'm not saying not to admit jealousy, but to say, wow, I am feeling jealous. Let me explore that, just like we would with anger, just like we might write it out and explore it. But there's a lot of shame around even allowing that into our consciousness. So whether it's self-righteousness or jealousy, that these ideas of kind of how we distance from our sense of seeing our attachments as property,
Mhm.
somehow not only obeying our script, but somehow our property.
Yeah. Which goes along the lines with that entitlement and deserving and not seeing the gift in the breath and the abundance, because there's like an underlined scarcity mentality that comes with jealousy and possession and all that stuff, when really, when you're connected to the great source, everything's abundant. Everything's abundant. You don't own it. It's given to you freely. And so it's a different energy that you're coming from. But I really do think that rather than, like you said, shaming it or shunning it, those things like jealousy and fear and resentment and self-righteousness and pride, any of those, anger, all of those, it's like ridiculous in our society because those things cause the most damage. But
So,
then we're supposed to we're supposed to act like they're not there.
or
Like,
be above them, I think,
yeah,
yeah, that's exactly
yeah,
what I think. It's like self-righteous, like also, yeah, like somehow it's there's the spiritual bypass we've talked about, but there's also the social bypass, like, and it's very damaging. It's just very
yeah.
damaging to act as if we are either above or beyond it, but also that, because the only way to transform it and alchemize it is to own it, embrace it, and
Hmm.
express somehow.
Hmm.
And I did want to add, that even also expressing, even after we might write the song or the poem or whatever, some emotions do require action and
Hmm.
taking steps to make changes. that the feeling may get to a place of, wow, no, I don't feel safe in this situation or this relationship or with this person, or I don't feel that I'm being seen or heard or respected. That sometimes these emotions, by alchemizing them and expressing them, because I do think we can creatively bypass, just like spiritually bypass, which I have done both, by the way, let me just say,
Me
in
too.
my life, but also asking that deeper question, does this require action on my part? Like if I find myself going over and over the same thing, if I express it and dissipates and the issue doesn't arise, then, that's fine. But if something, I keep hitting a wall, or something is that this is not okay, because it's one thing us keeping our side of the street clean, but then how, if somebody, out there, if you're out there, somebody's trying to rescue you. We've talked more about trying to not be the rescuer, but it also goes, if somebody's trying to, um, there's a lot of rescuers out there who have hidden agendas, or
Mm,
at least are, you know, can pull you into a situation where all of a sudden you can find your boundaries being violated, and you and fall in that drama triangle from any standpoint. And I don't know if you knew this, but I'm actually, my new passion is film, and I'm doing some screenwriting right now, and I find it's just fun, number one, but number two, it's like working on all these themes. I didn't know the drama triangle was originally created because he was a screenwriter and wanted to analyze. He was analyzing scripts, and he actually said the best scripts, or even the best plays, like, with in Shakespeare and stuff, the more people take different turns throughout the triangle in one story, the more profound and the more we love it. So actually,
wow.
isn't that interesting? And so the other side of it, I guess, part of the normalizing, I think it's important for everyone out there to know, um, be aware of it, be move towards these healthier things that McCall and I have been talking about, but know that part of the human drama is to struggle in these places, and just become more conscious. And if you feel like even you are lost in drama right now, just know that that's part of your current path. And we'd walk out of a theater if it was boring. That part of, we are here to
Mhm.
fully feel. The key is to just bring a bit more consciousness. I do feel if we can get our drama through our writing and music and keep our personal lives as healthy and healed as possible, but that takes a while. It can take decades to
Mhm.
do that. It doesn't mean you won't. I have fallen into this. I've oftentimes been sober for years, emotionally sober for years, and then fallen into the triangle again and go, whoa, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Usually a part of me is coming up to be healed that I'd forgotten about or that I'd repressed. And the soul is always seeking deeper layers of healing and wholeness. And
Mhm.
so that can happen to us at any time. And that's why we, I think, talked a little bit about that last time, was the alchemical or shamanic process or spiral of change, that death rebirths never end as long as we're in these bodies. And so maybe we can finish too with kind of um, blessing where anybody is out there, that this isn't judgment. We're not pathologizing these points in the triangle. We're saying that you could almost say that the roles of victim, rescuer, perpetrator is when you are unconscious about what's happening and you're
Mm.
taking it as ultimate reality.
Mm.
So we're simply asking you, it doesn't mean you may change it tomorrow, or you'll pull yourself out, or you'll still be in, hopefully, survivor thriver, or finding a good coach or challenger, but stepping back from it enough to give some space, and maybe even have a sense of humor about, there I go again, or where you are, and take that gift of that breath and create a little space around it, because we need, life is dramatic. I mean, I think what we
Mhm.
want to try to avoid is the melodrama and the unconscious drama that we actually are fueling, but
Mhm.
rather know that we can maybe be a little more conscious, a little more playful, a little bit more skillful, choosing to what degree and how, and not keep perpetuating something that is actually digging us deeper into a hole or the quicksand. And it is, I want to say, and this is something, at the same time, when I'm working with people, mentoring people and healing from codependency, I say it's as lethal as any drug.
Mm.
It probably is one of the leading causes of suicide,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Because you can feel so desperate and so lost.
Mm.
And I know I've been suicidal 3 times in my life, as without alcohol, drugs, and being highly successful. It was literally losing myself in someone else's drama,
Mm.
and 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 then blaming myself.
Exactly.
Right? Right? So
Mm.
so anybody out there suffering, know that we love you. And it's we are all in this together, and we need each
Yeah.
other to do the work that we have to do alone. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to give you a chance to any final thoughts, any final comments, and also again how people can find you. I just highly recommend McCall. I just she's going to be doing big things. There's so many
Mm.
gifts I see in you, and so much that I can just see unfolding for you in the future. And I'm just excited that I found you at this stage of your career before I can still get you on my podcast.
That's very kind. Thank you. I mean, you just touched on the perfect way to close this, because I mean, the reason I brought up the drama triangle again in my podcast now, even though I started working on it 20 years ago, is because I was facing a new round of it and going, what the hell? Right? There's
Look
nowhere.
already.
What's going on here? I thought I worked on this. I thought I wasn't codependent, whatever. So it's the spiraling, and I'm always working with this idea that we're learning to do the same things differently,
Mm,
and that's what we take in the spiral journey. So maybe there's always a triangle of drama, but it's different. Maybe that's why I like the compassion triangle, because what are we, just some detached zombies where like peace can be kind of boring if
yes.
if all you have is peace and no
Totally.
drama. So it's that balance and learning that. I really appreciate what you said, like letting ourselves be where we are and realizing that this is normal.
Yeah.
This is normal to be caught up in drama, to be hijacked from yourself, to be operating from places of trauma, to not know, not know yourself, be disconnected. We're born into that in this world. So the healing, we gain a little bit of consciousness and awareness each time, and a little bit more self love each time, a little bit more self compassion. But we're always in those spirals. It's the spiral journey. So allowing ourselves to be that brings it home and keeps it real, because that's real. Like that's what's real.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, McCall. And it reminds me of that same idea that as much as we want to touch the source and unity and that timeless, ageless, deathless place, which is ultimate reality, but which is also outside of time, that this realm is one of duality. Now it's nested in a unity. It's kind of like the Tao is the unity, and then the yin yang is the duality that makes the dance of being here. But I would say, electricity does not, none of what we're doing could be possible without a negative and positive pole.
Mhm.
Electricity needs a negative and positive which means it needs opposition to run. It needs opposition to flow. A river doesn't flow without a tension of opposites. And the more dramatic the the terrain, the more beautiful the river with the rapids, and the louder the song. So I love this where we're landing, because it is, I know for both of us, so much about not pathologizing the human condition with all of the light and dark, and honoring the whole human catastrophe. I always say we're a paradoxical, contradictory package of animal, human, and divine, and we're
Mm.
just trying to coming to deeper layers of awareness. But those other parts of us, the animal and human parts of us, are really the energy. I remember William Blake saying, go to hell for energy and going to heaven for form, and marry them. And he had his whole series of poems called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell.
Mm.
And, it's very, to me, that's kind of what both of us are really on in terms of the confluence of our work alchemically and shamanically and soulfully. So thank you for being here. And again, the way people can connect with you.
Oh yeah, best place is my website, McCallErickson.com. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, and my podcast is Falling into Soul on wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I highly recommend Falling into Soul, and you get a chance to hear McCall sing. She sings like an angel. Just it seems I need to say something deeper than that. It's because it's deeper than knowing our spiritual background. Like soulfully and deep and from the heart. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your journey. Thank you for sharing your journey. Tell them a little bit about your book and your new book too, because the titles themselves to me are worth hearing.
Well, the first book is The Second Half of the Mountain, and you can find it on Amazon. The second book, I haven't released the title yet.
Oh,
so I'm glad you didn't say it, because I know you know it, but I am working on it, and it's coming up very soon. So it's a follow-up book to The Second Half of the Mountain.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's exciting.
She writes very beautifully and from the heart and very transparently, and is very courageous and vulnerable about sharing her own dark times. And to me, if that's a real test of a writer and healer and a alchemist. So thank you, McCall Erickson, for being on Musitations and having a Soulversation with me once again. For those that don't know, I'm here on the Gulf Coast and you are in Hawaii. Yes. By the way, I have to tell you, and we can talk after, but I'm so excited. This script I'm working on, the sea turtle, Honu, I think is Honu is a big theme, a big symbol throughout. So I have to tell you more about it. And it's actually pretty much everything we've talked about is in the screenplay I'm working on. So I forgot you were in Hawaii, and I've been reading all about Hanu. I mean, we have them here, and I'm very connected to them. So yeah, we'll talk more about that.
That's awesome. I love that.
Be well. Take care. Godness bless you.
Thank you, brother.
And all of the listeners out there, we wish you well on your journey. Namaste.
Namaste.
You've been listening to Musitations, sound healing and sound wisdom for a world in need, where we explore all things musical, meditative, and creative for healing, transformation, and awakening the soul. I've been your guide and host, Michael Brant DeMaria. Feel free to check out my music on Pandora, Amazon Music, Spotify, XM Sirius Radio, or Soundscapes Cable. You can also check out my website at michaeldemaria.com or online programs at alldaypeace.com, alldaypeace.com. Listen to your heart, follow your soul, and we'll see you on the next episode of Musitations.